Distinctiveness of Chinese empire. I'm not a China specialist, and there are others that are here. Mark Selden, Professor Mark Selden is here. He can comment perhaps later on the character of Chinese empire. But just on the issue of types of empire, Hannah Arendt famously said in her treatise on empire that there are basically two types of empires in human history. Those that expand overland, and this would be the Russian Empire, the Chinese Empire, the Ottomans, the Austro-Hungarian, and the maritime empires. And that's, of course, in many ways, Halford Mackinder's work took that basic trope, the land powers versus the maritime powers. And China's strategy is essentially an elaboration of that style. I mean, they're expanding into adjacent territories and adjacent territories beyond that. It's a landward expansion of their economic reach. And the thing about geopolitics is it's curious the way it operates. The forces are deceptive. That Brzezinski strategy, for example, of splitting away Eastern Europe by driving into the pivot region, it seems sort of cockeyed. It seems nonsense, but it kind of worked. And it's at that level of abstraction, when you're unleashing these forces, you can't quite know what you're going to predict. But China's strategy seems very clear. It's this territorial expansion into adjacent territories, even ever expanding to adjacent territories, all the way across Central Asia, trying to reach into Africa. I mean, it seems that that's their strategy. All right. So yes, it's distinctive. But it's not without precedent. The second question was the escalation. Yeah. Actually, when I gave I gave a different version of this paper at Northwestern University, and one of my listeners was a retired major in the Singapore Air Force, whose job was missile defense. And he came up to me and said, you know why the Chinese, of course, are putting surface-to-air missiles on, because he said that's the lowest level of escalation. The surface-to-air missile is essentially a defensive missile. And so by inserting that, first of all, you do lay functional claim to the territory, but you do it in the least offensive way possible, the least threatening way possible. China can, in private conversations, say that's just defensive. It's not an offensive weapon. He said it's a very skillful move, but it's a move. It's an escalation. It's an expansion, and that appears to be China's whole strategy. It's just this relentless, quiet expansion, avoiding any confrontation, backing away, but nonetheless being there. And that's, of course, again, the logic of bases and naval power. It's that way that you use the patrols, which seem fluid, right, to, as I put it, turn the boundless open sea into your territorial waters.